Hey everybody, how's it going? Let's talk about your home recording studio. This is what I had originally recorded as the second half of the episode about headphones, studio monitors, and acoustic treatment, but I got a little carried on about acoustic treatment for quite a while, so I went ahead and split that out into its own episode here. So I'll go ahead and present this as episode 5 of the Home Recording Basics series about acoustic treatment, and I hope you enjoy. Okay, and that brings me to the next topic, which is acoustic treatment. So you've spent a bunch of money on a pair of studio monitors, you spend all these hours poring over every detail of your mix, and you get everything set exactly how you like it. It sounds just great to you in your mix position, right between your studio monitors. And now you burn that mix to a CD, or you render it to an MP3 and you put it on your phone, you take it out to your car and you hit play, and it's all drums and bass guitar, and you can't hear the vocals, and what the heck, this sounded so great in my room. What happened? I pored over every detail of this. I made sure the bass wasn't too loud. I made sure the kick drum wasn't too loud. I made sure of all these things, and now I get outside of my room and play it in a different environment, and now it sounds awful. It sounds way out of balance. What happened? Well, that is when the importance of acoustic treatment for your listening space comes in. Now, this is one of the hardest things to want to spend money on because it's not a cool gadget techie, there's no knobs and blinky lights and meters and cables to plug in, and it's not a feel-good purchase. But it is going to be an extremely important purchase in the grand scheme of your home studio. When you're very first starting out, it's hard to say this, but don't worry about it. We all live in crappy sounding rooms, little bedrooms and garages and basements, and they're just pretty horrible sounding spaces. And it's not exactly the cheapest thing to take a small, crappy sounding room and turn it into a small, good sounding room. The first things that you're going to have to understand are a little bit of the physics behind sound and reflections and how sound behaves inside of an enclosed space. I'm not a physicist by any means or an acoustician or anything, so my level of knowledge about the physics behind it is pretty superficial. So I'm not going to pretend like I have a huge scientific insight into these things, but the main thing that you have to realize is that sound bounces, right? So you think of the guy standing at the edge of the Grand Canyon going, hello! And then a second later, you hear it back, hello! That sound striking some surface way far away and bouncing back. You think about the rock star in the arena, hello Detroit, Detroit. He's in a big space with these speakers that fire into another surface and reflect back, and you hear that echo, right? We've all played with echoes when you're in a ravine or a canyon, or there's someplace maybe downtown where there's a big building, and we all understand pretty well that sound bounces, right? In a small room, it's a little bit harder to put your finger on it because you don't have that kind of visceral feedback of hello, of that like true echo like that. In a small room, instead, we end up with these very fast, very quick reflections that happen, and that's sound bouncing around the room. And you can hear that. You just walk into an average bedroom and you clap your hands, and you can hear that reverberation from your hands excite that room very quickly and send a very sharp spike of sound all around that bounces around, and you can hear that. You hear it in a few different ways of not only just an echo, but also what's called a flutter echo, which is that kind of ringy sounding sound that you hear. And that's just a sound bouncing back and forth really fast between two parallel surfaces. Also keep in mind that high frequencies tend to travel in almost a beam. Like they tend to travel in kind of like a narrow cone, and they will reflect in that kind of way. Low frequencies tend to radiate in all directions from their source, so they tend to be less directional. And in your small room, in your small home studio, out of the top 5 problems that you're going to have, number 1 is going to be bass frequencies. Number 2 is going to be bass frequencies. 3 is going to be bass frequencies. 4 is going to be bass frequencies. And 5 is going to be all the other frequencies. Bass frequencies are your enemy in a small home studio setting because of the way bass frequencies behave. If you think about it, have you ever shopped for a bass amp versus shopping for a guitar amp? And you look at the wattages, right? So let's say you're shopping for a solid state amplifier, and you find a 50 watt solid state guitar amplifier and you turn it all the way up. It's going to be pretty loud, right? Now you find a 50 watt solid state bass amplifier. You turn it all the way up. Well, it doesn't seem nearly as loud. You have a drummer in the room. You're rehearsing with a set of acoustic drums. The 50 watt guitar amplifier can compete no problem. You hear the guitar fine. But that 50 watt bass amplifier, you've got it cranked all the way up, and you're having trouble hearing it over the drums, right? What that tells us is that it takes a lot of energy to produce bass frequencies, to produce low frequency sound at a high volume. So if you imagine those bass frequency sound waves in the room, they contain a lot of energy because it took a lot of energy to produce them. And now that energy is in the air as a pressure wave. As soon as that wave strikes a surface, strikes a hard surface like a wall, a ceiling, a floor, it's going to reflect. Now, bass frequencies are a little more reluctant to reflect. It takes a lot more mass from a surface in order to make a bass frequency truly bounce off of it rather than just pass through it. You know, if you think about it, if you take a piece of cloth, like a shirt or something, and you put it over a speaker, what does it do? It muffles the sound, which means that it's absorbing the higher frequencies, but it's not doing anything to the middle and lower frequencies. Now you take a thicker piece of material, take like a blanket or a comforter, and put that over a speaker, and it'll muffle a little more, right? The high frequencies are almost totally gone. They're being absorbed by that material. But the middle frequencies are starting to be absorbed by that material. But the bass frequencies you still hear just like there's hardly any difference in the bass frequencies, whether you have a comforter over the speaker or not, right? So that's happening in your room all the time. These bass frequencies are, well, all the frequencies are ricocheting off all the hard surfaces in your room, and they're entering your ear all at different times. But not only that, so they're creating like a reverberation inside your room because you're hearing the reflected sound after you're hearing the sound that's coming directly from the speaker to your ear. And that's what creates reverb. That's what reverb is reverberation. It's sound waves bouncing around a room and then eventually hitting your ears at different times. The problems occur, and these problems that lead to your weird sounding mix that sounds fine right from your mix position, but sounds weird on all the other systems you play it on. This problem comes from sound waves bouncing around a room and interacting with each other. Now this is a little hard to explain without something to write on or draw on, but you'll just have to visualize this a little bit. Imagine there is a sound wave traveling from your speaker to the back of your room let's say at 80 hertz. It's an 80 hertz sound wave. So that means there is this wave of pressure in the air that 80 times a second is going from a high pressure to low pressure. And it's let's say it's a very high amplitude wave. Let's say it's a loud noise. Now, when that bass frequency, since it's kind of radiating in all directions, that bass frequency is going to strike a surface in your room and reflect. It's going to strike another surface in a different direction, since these things are kind of traveling in all directions. It's going to strike a different surface and reflect. Now those two reflected bass frequency waves meet each other in the middle of the room somewhere. Well, if they meet each other where both waves are at a high point in their pressure cycle, then they're going to have an additive effect. So if one bass wave that's this loud makes contact with another bass wave that's this loud somewhere in your room, they're going to add to each other, and they're going to make it this loud at that point in the room. If one that's this loud makes contact with one that's zero, amplitude, well, it's going to have no effect whatsoever. But if one that's this loud in a positive direction meets one that's this loud in a negative direction, they meet each other somewhere in your room, they're going to cancel out and make no sound at all. So what this means is that around your room, now you have this funky sounding mix. It sounds great right where your listening position is. Well, now stand up. Right, like right from your mixing position, stand up and listen to the bass frequencies in that same mix. I bet it changes. I bet the bass sounds different. I bet the kick drum sounds different. Now get up and walk to the back corner of your room and listen to the bass frequencies. I bet it sounds different again. Get up and walk to the other to the other corner of your room. I bet it sounds different again. Everywhere in your room, there are all these points where frequencies are colliding with each other and either canceling each other out or adding to each other, basically multiplying. And that makes it really, really, really difficult to make informed decisions about how to adjust levels and everything in an EQ in your mix. So the whole point to acoustic treatment, and the whole point to this whole tirade here, is that you want to absorb these things rather than let them bounce around your room. Now, you've probably seen like acoustic foam, and it's a very, very popular item. There's brands like Auralex. There's a bunch of other brands, but if you just go to like Amazon and type acoustic treatment, almost all of what pops up in the search results are foam. Now, foam has its applications, but the problem is foam tends to only effectively absorb high frequency reflections. So once imagine you have a guitar and you just strum that thing on a full first position G chord, and that's there's a lot of frequencies going there. There's that low E string with the G on it, all the way up to the high E string with the G on it. There's a pretty broad range of frequencies happening right there. Let's say that sound comes out of your monitors and hits some acoustic foam. That foam is going to do a good job of absorbing the higher frequencies, but those bass frequencies, like I had mentioned before, that foam is not dense enough to do anything. All it's going to do is pass right through foam as if it weren't there, and it's going to strike the hard surface of your drywall and whatever's behind your drywall, and it's going to reflect off of that. So what the end result is that the high frequencies get absorbed. They don't bounce around the room anymore, but now the mid frequencies and the low frequencies do. So that's going to have a similar effect to what I described before of putting a relatively thin sheet of t-shirt material over your speaker. You're going to, all of a sudden the room is going to sound muddy. You're going to lose all the high frequency reverberation, but you're still going to have all that low frequency reverberation and mid frequency reverberation bouncing around the room. So that is why you need to invest in something denser and thicker than foam. Now, the most popular choices for us today are going to be mineral wool or rock wool, which is a special type of insulation, or rigid fiberglass insulation. The most popular one being Owings Corning 703. It's a rigid fiberglass and these products are much denser than regular old pink insulation. So the density helps them absorb down to lower frequencies. But in order to make them effective at absorbing lower frequencies, you need to use them in thicknesses of, I would say, at least 4 inches. Anything thinner than 4 inches, and it's going to start becoming transparent to low frequencies again. So the most important things that you want to treat in your studio are going to be what's called the first reflection points. You can find the first reflection points in your studio using a tried and true method called the mirror trick. So you get your studio monitors placed wherever they're going to be, get them in their final resting position. You decide where your mix position is going to be by forming an equilateral triangle between the two monitors and your head. So it's going to be equal distance from each of your ears to the monitor. And that's going to be the same distance as the monitors are from each other. So you're going to form a perfect equilateral triangle between your head and your two monitors. That's going to be your mixing position. Now, in order to figure out where your first reflection points are, you sit at your mixing position and you have a friend with a mirror, like a little hand mirror maybe. And you have that friend place that mirror all the way against the wall. And while you're sitting at your mixing position, you have your friend start scooting that mirror down the wall until you see, from your mixing position, you see a reflection of one of your speakers. Either one of them. And just the way it works out, they're going to be pretty close to each other, where you see your left monitor in the mirror versus your right monitor in the mirror. Make a little mark on the wall right there. That's a reflection point. Do that on the other wall. Scoot that mirror until you see one monitor or the other. Make a little mark. Keep scooting it until you see the other monitor. Make a little mark. They're going to be pretty close to each other. Now do the same thing on the back wall, behind you. And right now mine are behind the camera here, so you can't really see them. You're going to want to treat that as well. So once you have, and there are going to be more than one spot on the back wall. There's also, you can't forget about the ceiling above you. There's going to be a reflection point. It's going to be at the same point pretty much as where your two left and right reflection points are. There's going to be one right above you. Okay, so you've got it above you, left, right, and behind you. Those are going to be your first reflection points. Those are going to be the points that are going to be the most responsible for distorting the frequencies that you hear in your room when you're listening through monitors. You're going to want to treat those, and you're going to want to treat them with as thick of a thickness of mineral wool or OC703 as you can. I would recommend a 4-inch thickness, and if you can swing it, a 2-inch air gap behind that. The most common size for a sound absorbing panel, and that's what I'm talking about here, would be 2 feet wide by 4 feet tall. And so if you have it, 2 by 4 by 4 to 6 inches thick, that's going to do a pretty darn good job of absorbing down to a pretty low frequency, and that's going to result in a much more balanced sound in your room over using foam. Even if you double up foam and make foam 4 inches thick, it's just not dense enough to really do much when it comes to those low frequencies. All right, and since we are in a small room, and I had mentioned that the bass frequencies are going to be the biggest part of your problem, you are going to want to use bass traps. And now that is essentially what we've been talking about here in these 4 to 6 inch Rockwool or OC703 panels. But the corners, just the way that bass frequencies behave in a room, they tend to ride along surfaces a little bit, which means that any point where two surfaces meet, like a corner between where two walls meet, or where a floor and a wall meet, or where a ceiling and a wall meet, bass frequencies tend to kind of collect there, and that's a great place to absorb bass frequencies so they don't reflect around the room. So there is a very common design for bass traps that specifically fit into corners, and they're called super chunk. You can hop on YouTube here and just type in super chunk, and there's a bunch of do-it-yourself. It essentially involves getting some mineral wool, cutting it into triangles, and stacking those triangles in your corner, floor to ceiling. Then you can put a frame around it. Then you cover it in some material to keep all the fibers from blowing around your room. Those fibers can be irritating to the lungs. They can be irritating to the skin. So you want to wrap it in some sort of material to keep those fibers from just constantly releasing into your room. you're going to want bass traps in all four corners of your room, assuming that you're in a rectangular room like most of us are. Your front corners, you're going to want floor-to-ceiling bass traps. Your rear corners, you're going to want floor-to-ceiling bass traps. And honestly, in a small room, that's probably only going to scratch the surface of how much bass absorption you're truly going to need in your room. Eventually, kind of like in my room here, I'm almost out of space of places to put more traps, more absorption. The room sounds pretty good, but the bass frequencies are still out of control in this room. It is very challenging to make informed mix decisions on bass guitar, kick drum, things like that in this room, even after all the time and money that I spent on getting the corners, first reflection points all treated. You're going to want to, if you can, and like I said, it's anywhere two surfaces meet, any corner. So maybe if you have room, trap where the floor meets your wall. If you have room, trap where the ceiling meets the wall. The most important, really the easiest to trap are going to be the four corners, floor to ceiling, just because those tend to be kind of out of the way in most rooms. That's why the super chunk, that triangular trap in the corner is going to be such a popular decision. I guess, by this point, I've been yammering on here, so I've probably lost most of my viewers by this point. But if you're trying to decide which room in your house to dedicate to a home studio, go with the biggest room you can, because the smaller your room, the more problematic the bass frequencies are going to be. If you have the choice between a little bedroom and a cavernous recreation room in your basement or something, pick that big room. That's your studio now. Maybe your wife or girlfriend can move her hobby stuff over to the other side of it. But you don't have to claim the whole room. Enough room for your desk, some treatment, your instruments, whatever. But the bigger the room, the better, because it's just going to let those bass frequencies breathe a little bit more. They're not gonna be so problematic to absorb. The smaller the room gets, the more trouble you're gonna have controlling the bass in the room. If you're trying to decide which room to put your studio in, and one of your rooms has the same measurement in more than one dimension, let's say your room is 8 feet tall, but also 8 feet wide, I would avoid using that room. Because now you have two different dimensions that are both going to reinforce the same problem frequencies in your room. If your room is 8 feet tall and 8 feet wide and also 8 feet long, you will never get the bass under control in that room, because you have now three dimensions of your room all reinforcing the same problems. So this room that I'm in here, it's just about 17 feet long, about a little more than 13 feet wide, and under 8 feet tall. So none of the three dimensions of the room are multiples of each other, and they also aren't the same measurement. And I still have a ton of problems with bass in this room. I'm going to need to invest in more trapping and make more attempts at getting the bass under control in this room. Otherwise, you've got your fancy monitors, and even though they're trying to give you an accurate representation of what your mix sounds like, but now your room is interfering in that. And oh man, you can save yourself so much heartache by just investing in some good broadband absorption. And by broadband, that's what I mean by it absorbs down to a fairly low frequency. It would have to be extremely thick in order to absorb down to the lowest frequencies. But even at 4 to 6 inches thick, it's still going to get down pretty deep. You get those corners trapped, that's going to get down pretty deep. It's going to do a lot towards absorbing your lowest frequency reflections. And if you can, get all the other junctions of walls to ceiling, walls to walls, walls to floor, any of those that you can trap are going to benefit you in the long run. But I understand it's not a very sexy investment. It's not a very fun thing to spend money on, because it's not technically gear, but when it comes down to trying to make informed decisions, make the best mixes you can with what's available, a little bit of mineral wool, some wood, some screws, or some glue, some fabric to cover them with. You can make your own pretty well. If you have a little more money to spend, there are professionally made ones. The ones that I went with are from GIK Acoustics, who I really like. Those guys worked with me. They did a really fantastic job of putting up with all my questions and taking all the information about my room in, and they have a lot of color options if because this is still a creative space. You still want it to feel good. You want the decor to not be ugly. So it's kind of nice to actually have the room feel nice, look nice. But we're dealing with audio, so how nice your room looks isn't necessarily going to translate to your mixes. But if you're writing, playing in your space, it's kind of nice. It feels nice to have a good looking space. Okay, I think I've blabbered on long enough here. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments section below. I hope that this has been some help to you. I hope this has given you a little bit of insight into making some decisions about buying headphones, buying monitors, and hopefully I've stressed enough the importance of investing in some acoustic treatment for your mixing space. All right, well, I think that'll do it for me this time. I'll see you next time. Take it easy, guys.